This is the DLR Cast, the essential podcast for fans of Diamond David Lee Roth. All right, folks, back at you once again at the DLR Cast, the only podcast by and for fans of the mighty Diamond One, Diamond David Lee Roth. As always, I am joined in our journey going through the morass and the avenues and wayward streets that is any news that we can find on Dave and Van Halen. I'm joined, of course, as always, with dangerous Darren Paltrowitz. Darren, how are you? We do have news, and we've had news, and it's been a pretty interesting last few days.
I'd say last 2 weeks, we've gotten about 6 years worth of Van Halen news. And none of it was like helmed in the last 4 years. I think you're reading my mind when I'm saying about the Dave's new song. Come on, that was not recorded within the last 6 years.
Oh, well, let's start there. Painting with the Moon showed up early Saturday evening, if I recall. It showed up on YouTube. So let's get into the song, but it took a minute for it to get up on Spotify and everywhere else. It was just as usual with this music, just with no advance warning or nothing, no details. The only difference this time, at least as far as the video is concerned, it's kind of a 3D video. You move your phone around when you watch, or move your cursor around on YouTube. You can see different views of what seems to be Dave's kind of scratched wood painting motif, I guess. That's how it kind of looks to me, of his last paintings or images that we've seen up on social media.
Yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that this is a John 5 era track. Would you agree, or do you say there's a tiny chance that it was recorded in the last couple of years?
I think it's a John 5 track, but probably worked on, and who knows who might be on it. I mean, I was trying to listen to the vocals, and I went back and listened to Low Res Sunset, which when I go back, I realized I like that song more and more and more. And then I went back and listened to Giddy Up and Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill. And it pretty much does sound to my ears very similarly, but there's parts of his vocals sometimes where I think, okay, is this newer? I like the song. It's an odd song. I can't figure out the lyrics one way or another. I mean, jumping on a mattress, I'm not exactly sure what that's supposed to mean. And there's not really a hook per se, a big chorus, right. But I've noticed too that these songs are pretty short. This one clocks in at just barely 3 minutes, I think, and I like it. I really dig it. That piano bit in the beginning is really cool, and Dave's. Let's put it this way: whether it's recorded in the last 4 years, 10 years ago, whenever, the vocals sound great.
The vocals sound so great to the point that's why I'm saying this was not recorded within the last 8 years. Because we've talked about this at length on the podcast. That first 2007 reunion tour with Van Halen, his vocals were strong as ever.
Absolutely.
And then on a different kind of trippy album, okay, it's fine. I mean, who knows how many takes? They said it was 3 takes. That's all he'll do in the Roth leaks that came out. Who knows what was edited digitally, but the 2012 tour, the vocals were not the strongest ever. And we know 2015, the vocals were definitely weak. And the vocals were weak in Vegas too in 2019, 2020, that era as well. So I just can't imagine that the guy just suddenly revitalized his vocals magically out of nowhere in the last 3 years. That's how strong he was singing in 2012 and a couple of years before that.
I can't disagree with you on that. We got to talk as far as the timing of this showing up, because it comes, I don't think it's any coincidence, and nothing with Dave I don't think is a coincidence, given the control freak, how much that and that's not a shot. That's a compliment. That it's no coincidence this came out right after within days of that the former music journalist who struck up we talked about this in the last episode. I'm sure listeners know what we're talking about here. The former music journalist that struck up a conversation with Eddie via emails through the years that rollingstone.com printed. And then, of course, we also have that really very interesting transcribed interview with a supposed Dave and/or Van Halen insider at the Van Halen Unchained podcast. So this was all in a week, and all of a sudden, right, about a week and a half, and then all of a sudden, boom, a new song comes out, which I'm sure got everybody wondering about the lyrical content. Did that mean anything? I don't know. I don't know if that really. I don't think so.
I don't think that any of Roth's lyrics are particularly autobiographical from his solo career.
Well, to him, it probably means something. I'm saying I don't read into this that that the lyrics have anything to do with what was talked about in those interviews, in as far as what was talked about in the RollingStone.com piece with that guy, the former music journalist, or the Van Halen Unchained podcast interview.
Well, where I'm going with that is I am assuming that this comes from the John 5 batch of songs.
Right.
That USA Today article, he was calling those songs part of a jukebox musical. And then I don't know if it was that or another interview where he said, well, these were going to be the Van Halen songs, and the Van Halens turned them down because they didn't hear it. And then after Eddie Van Halen died, he said he wrote it about Eddie, or it was a tribute to Eddie. So it's like the story changed just a tad bit as to whether it was going to be for a Broadway musical or a Van Halen album, or it was freshly written out of emotional tribute. So that said, when I say that Dave's lyrics are not autobiographical, I mean, they weren't. Atomic Punk is not an autobiographical song. Neither is Mean Street. But you know, in reading and listening to a lot of his interviews from the 80s and 90s, you know, Just Like Paradise is not an autobiographical song. And there's a lot of Dave songs where you think it's about a car, but it's about a woman, or you think it's about a woman, but it's about a car. I think he's just big on the writing stuff and going, can this mean two or three things? Yes, perfect.
Sure. I dig the lyrics, even if I dig the lyrics all the time, even if most of the time I don't know what the hell he's talking about 95% of the time. So yeah. Here's something I realized the other day, and I looked it up earlier today. John 5 never comments on any of these songs. He doesn't post about them on Instagram, not that I would expect him to, but there's really nothing in the news about it. The news of this hit, you know, everything from you know, the other day there was a Blabbermouth song up, but I think they're a Blabbermouth piece. I think they're using quotes from John about talking about the recordings from a previous interview. From your interview. Yes, that's right. Excuse me. I was just scrolling down.
Yeah.
So kudos to you. But right. But I mean, as far as anything to do with, you know, no, John 5 hasn't said, yeah, Low Res Sunset, that was a lot of fun to anything about that. He's been really mum's the word, just the basics, the very basics, I think, right, about recording the album. And I suppose there's not much he can talk about or is allowed to talk about, perhaps.
My interview, and at least one other one, there's this one song he talks a lot about called Nothing Could Have Stopped Us. And he said that Dave sounds his best on his track, that's his favorite of the tracks, but that one remains unreleased. I still stand my ground. It's not an album that was done in 10 days or anything like that. It was a bunch of sessions over time that kind of got dumbed down into being called an album. Because an insider in the Roth camp, not the same person that's the Deep Throat from the Unchained podcast, different person that knows what's going on. They didn't think that the John 5 album was ever finished. They told me it's a bunch of mixes in different states. And I saw some other article where they said that Dave had been tweaking it over the years. So it's, I guess, Dave's Chinese democracy, really.
Ooh, great analogy. Great analogy. As far as the length of as far as the length of time. Well, kudos to you for getting that quote, being quoted in the big Blabbermouth piece yesterday. But you asked a great question, and whether John 5 gets any notice at all, and he doesn't. That these songs are coming out, he doesn't at all. And I found, that's not surprising at all, but I found that super interesting. And he talks about the recording sessions. I mean, he has given a lot of info on this, and your interview definitely does that. But still, It's just he doesn't know what songs are going to come out, and I would bet he doesn't know if he's listening to this song, he's probably he might be hearing new stuff on it that he didn't hear the last time he heard the song.
To piggyback on what you just said, as you like me have your music industry past, and one of the tools that's open to the public is you can search song catalogs of ASCAP and BMI, CSAC, some of the companies that handle all the copyrights for public performances of songs. Dave's catalog is so messed up when you go through track by track. This song is not registered. Then there's songs where they just made up that he co-wrote it. And then also when you go through the Van Halen stuff, I think we've talked about this on the air. You know how part of Michael Anthony's exit interview from Van Halen was waiving his publishing to the 1984 album?
Right.
Well, Dave is a co-writer on Eruption and the 1984 intro.
Okay. Are the other guys?
Yes.
Well, that makes sense because Eddie always split the publishing 4 ways, every song on every album.
Oh, well, not 1984. Michael Anthony's taken off of that. But,
okay. Well, and add Michael McDonald to all weight. Excuse me. I forgot about that.
Exactly. But the people overseeing his catalog are just, the eye is off the ball when it comes to registering the songs in a timely manner. So I'm not saying he's losing tons of money, but the thing is he is losing a little bit of money by not keeping his catalog up to date because the stuff is not going to get paid out if it's not registered in a timely manner.
Got it. So how many songs have been released so far, supposedly from the John 5 sessions? There's 5 songs that were in the digital comic.
Yes.
And what do we have? 3 now? Are we Pointing at the Moon, Low Res Sunset, Giddy Up, 4 songs, and which of the and
Alligator Shoes, I believe.
Well, I'm saying what was released separately from the comic. So we're talking about 7 or 8 songs at least, right? No, Sunset Bar and Grill.
Those songs were all in the comic. I believe that's 5, and all of them were there. So this makes number 5 or number 6.
Okay, all right.
But I
thought there was some instrumentals and stuff. That's what I was thinking of as far as the 5.
It's unclear if those are from the John 5 album or those are incidentals, because a common misconception here is that the album Diamond Days is entirely covers, when it actually, I believe, has 2 originals on there. And one of them is called Thug Pop, which John 5 co-wrote.
Right.
And there's another song when I was looking through his BMI catalog registration called, I think, Pop Rocks and Coke. Yeah. I'm not sure where that is, if that's an instrumental that was made for this album. I don't know Pop Rocks and Coke. Does anybody else?
No, but it was Red Bull and Pop-Tarts.
I'm
looking. You sent me a photo the other day, and I'm looking at a screenshot, I guess, and it says writer composer, and I guess it's missing names in the screenshot, right? But Red Bull and Pop-Tarts, writer composer Lowry, John 5, and performer David Lee Roth.
Yeah, I apologize for getting that name.
You were close.
They're 2 sugary things paired with a beverage.
This is the song Mountain Dew and Pop Rocks.
The new song Dr. Pepper and Twix.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a song that was made for the John 5 album or sessions, or if that's just the leftover from the Diamond Dave DLR Band sessions, because I'm assuming that the song that's on the Diamond Dave album was a leftover from the DLR Band album, because it had 3 different guitarist writers on it.
And I've just pulled up, as far as just to answer the question that I should have known the answer to. We so far heard Giddy Up, Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill, Low Res Sunset, Alligator Pants, and Manda Bala from the comic, the Roth Project. from 2020 now. Good Lord, that's 2 years ago. And which, by the way, we're like around our 2-year anniversary since we hatched this thing or came out. Somewhere it was in the summertime, I remember. What started as a conversation, one of our many conversations. Hey, this should be a podcast.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels like we've covered everything possible with Roth, but then the more interviews and the more things that come out is the more stories you feel still have to be documented. And I figure once the John 5 album comes, then we can end the podcast. Until
that would be good with a big podcast ending review dissection of the album. All right. Well, before we got some other stuff to get onto, and whether or not we can see if this coincides with what we know with the release of the song. But overall, I'll tell you, when you listen to all these songs, I really like the vibe of it all. And we knew it was going to be kind of this because John 5 alluded to several years ago that it kind of had this acoustic-y country sort of vibe. I think you can call it Americana a little bit in some spots or whatever you want to call it. It is very acoustic. It is I call it very laid back. I bet Dave could come up with some sort of apt descriptor, Americana, laid back. It's your low-res Americana sunset vibe or something, you know what I mean? You can see throwing some fun words together like that. But that's kind of, I really dig it. There's no it's not hard at all. There's no crazy solos. It feels very, here's an overused word, but this just pops into my head and I think it fits perfectly, organic.
Well said. I can't top that. And when you think about his overall discography, there's nothing he did twice. And that continues the theme of this because Diamond Dave was a covers album. Okay, the one before the DLR Band, I guess you could say that's a return to form in a way. The album before that, Your Filthy Little Mouth, kind of a blues. There's a reggae track because you love No Big Ting.
There's
some lounge stuff. And that followed, that was actually a year before the Vegas show. And before that, A Little Ain't Enough. Kind of all over the place. Nothing to do with Skyscraper, which was an electronic-ish poppy album.
Had a modern sheen to it, kind of chasing the pop hit there, but still had that vineness to it. And then, of course, Eat 'Em and Smile, which was just a complete ICBM out of out of the rock vaults. You know what I mean?
Which has nothing to do with Crazy from the Heat, the EP, which is almost like adult contemporary covers when you kind of think about it. Roth was going for the older audience with that album. He wasn't going for 15-year-olds when he put that album out. So he just changes it up. And I guess there's a lot to respect from the fact that he doesn't try to do anything twice except write a song that sounds like Hot for Teacher, because there's a Hot for Teacher on more albums than Do you know what I'm talking about?
You got Slam Dunk.
Yeah, you got Slam Dunk. You got It's Showtime on a little bit.
Right. You got I'm spacing on the name of the song on Skyscraper, but there's that fast up tempo song, which I can't even. Is it the second track on the record?
The Bottom Line.
Got to have it. Yep, there you go.
Yeah, so he always tries to break new ground, except writing a new Hot for Teacher. That's the inevitability. It
reminds me that a variation of the Hot for Teacher ending was on multiple Van Halen records. The way Eddie had that band had a kind of a trademark kind of flourish song ending.
Yeah,
which was always cool. But if you're living that stuff for a long time, you go, hey, I'm expecting this. This kind of sounds familiar, at least in the first 6 albums, right?
Yeah. So, we don't know whatever is going to happen with the John 5 album. We don't know if there's going to be another single in 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 hours, 2 years. We don't know, but I agree with you. It's a good look. It's a cool album for especially an older artist that is not chasing hits.
Right. And just give us more, please. That's all I can ask. And we always see, how many times on this podcast do we joke around either at the ending, but with a lot of truth to it, and that is, hey, we could have a new track showing up tomorrow, folks. Yeah. We'll be talking about it. And that's exactly what happened barely a week after we put out the last episode. And as frustrating as that could be, I totally dig it, because in a world that can be so predictable when it comes to rock and rollers, there's nothing predictable about anything to do with. The only thing that's predictable is that you're not going to know anything. And if
Yeah.
you think you know anything or you find out anything, well, you're going to end up questioning that an awful lot too, as we have seen with, this is a perfect segue to the fallout to those two just alluded to, two big pieces of news, I guess. The Rolling Stone.com piece followed, or I'm not even sure the time frame of it, which came first, if I recall, but the Rolling Stone.com piece and then the Van Halen Unchained podcast with a supposed insider.
Well, the Unchained, I'm going to say, predated it 1 or 2 days. It was really in a 48-hour window. We got that 72-hour window. We had the Eddie Trunk rumor, which I never heard anyone talk about a second time. No one took super seriously on that one. So if it was a really slow news day, we would have done a whole episode about that Eddie Trunk rumor. But thankfully, we do not have to, because it was squashed and there's bigger fish to fry. But yeah, I mean, one of our listeners was texting me within a day of our episode posting, and we're pretty sure who the Deep Throat is. I know it would not be in good form to just go like, oh, it's that person, but I just thought about that. Did you brainstorm about that? Who that all was, or did you just go, I don't care, good news, I'll take it?
I tried to a little. I did a little bit, but I couldn't get hung up on that stuff because does it come with some sort of bias depending on who it is? I mean, you hear, right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's either from Dave's camp or Van Halen camp. Now, I don't know. How deep is Dave's camp? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? We just don't know. And the other thing I have to answer as well, or ask, is why now? Why would this happen at all? Right? Why would you unless you got some sort of offhanded blessing? And I mean, I would encourage anybody to go check out that podcast, because it's really, there's a lot of great information there that this insider talks about. And I certainly learned a lot of things, but I also, the whole time I'm listening to it, wondering, all right, how much of this is because clearly this is okay. Someone from Dave's camp. How much of this is a little bit of spin? How much of this could be revisionist history? How much of this is what we know to be present news or accurate news, or the last word of the story, right? Especially when it comes to when you read that RollingStone.com piece, because there's two different versions of how, towards the last couple of years of Eddie's life, that relationship with Dave was, especially around that last 2015 tour.
Yes. Yeah. Originally, like, the people that I was thinking were the Deep Throat source, I was thinking that it was two different managers that had worked with Dave, because I thought, well, they knew the She and Vi stuff, where it was a 2-album deal. That's something I'd never heard before. Did you ever hear that?
No, I have not.
So I first thought, well, this is a person who was there at the beginning. And then I was stumped by going, well, this person knew the identities of the people who had the COVID diagnoses. What would be the correct word for diagnosis, but pluralized? Diagnosis. They had the diag. Well, whatever it is, the people that were specifically sick, they knew that. So then you go, okay, so this is a person that knows the beginning. This is a person that knows the end. And then, without saying who I think it is, I was doing the thing where you go, okay, they're talking about what a great piano player Dave is. And I went, okay, so not a musician. That came from a tip from a listener of ours named Eric. He was skeptical when the person said that Dave is a great 1930s style piano player and that he's an excellent guitar player. You think he's a great guitar player?
I think he's a really good guitar player, and Eddie pretty much confirmed that, unless that in that Guitar World interview, I think it was for A Different Kind of Truth, the one big interview he did.
He confirmed that, but then those Eddie texts with Blair, the journalist, he's saying, I'm not allowed to say anything negative about Dave in these interviews. So you're the only person I'm saying this to. So now you take that grain of salt out. But hearing what a great musician he is, you go, that person's either a big apologist or that person's not a musician. And then you hear the parts to the basement. The stuff is in the basement.
Well, that's how I immediately went, oh, well, even before you got to that point, it just sounded like it wasn't a neutral party.
Yeah. So, a new theory that comes to mind is, did this person do this interview because they knew that the Rolling Stone piece was coming? Because hear me out for a second. The Rolling Stone article had a part where it said representatives for Van Halen, David Lee Roth, etc. declined comment. So they knew that this article was in the pipeline. I don't know if Rolling Stone gives you 72 hours or 24 hours or 2 weeks to get back. But Rolling Stone, after what had happened with the college athletes, they will verify everything so that they don't get sued, because there's been some bad libel cases over the years with Rolling Stone. So you would have to assume Van Halen has made Rolling Stone's made a lot of money off of Van Halen over the years with cover stories, anniversary editions, and whatnot. And then also you can argue Rolling Stone is being founded by Jan Wenner, who founded the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's another way he wants to keep Van Halen happy in some form, like the connections on all that end. So I don't see this as a thing where they gave Van Halen 4 hours to reply and ran with it. I think that they knew this article was coming. Was this insider beating it to the punch? Because let's face it, those Eddie texts do not make Dave look great.
No, but man, how do they find out that this thing is coming and what the context is?
Because they were pressed for comment.
Right. But do they still, it's not like, hey, this is what we're gonna run with. Do you want to comment on this? If a reporter's reaching out, is it more the case of we're running a story and kind of just some bare bones basics?
It depends on your ranking in this world. If it were you or me, Rolling Stone would go, do you want to comment? Yes or no? You got 4 hours. Well, they decline comment. If it's Van Halen and they have a proper publicist or something like that, they'll go, well, send us what the quotes are and we'll look at them. That's how it works at a bigger level. I've seen that happen with artists I've worked around and known, where they actually get to look at the stuff before, like, it's embargoed, but they get to look at the stuff and decide if they're going to comment on it.
Yeah. I think they don't know the full depth of well, first off, who's the representative they get in contact with, right? And
I'll tell you that stuff if you want, because you got to remember, what was Eddie's widow's profession?
Publicist. I'm talking about Dave, though.
Oh, Dave, everything goes through his accountant, Jerry.
Okay, but does Rolling Stone know that?
Yeah.
Somebody there, I would imagine, has to, or how to get a hold of this person.
Yeah, on the website on davidleeroth.com.
That's right.
Jerry's contact there. Then also, whenever like Dave does something scandalous or big, and people ask for comments, if it's the bigger outlet, if Fox News, they got an exclusive comment on the Vegas dates being canceled. I think Entertainment Weekly did, and I think Rolling Stone. I'm pretty sure only 3 places got like a personalized comment beyond what went up, like and call me when you're ready to do the wildfires benefits. He tacked on an extra line for those outlets.
Right. Man, the pot stirs.
Yeah, well, all this also goes against something he was saying when I think it was the Mark Maron interview, I think, where he said he gave up his cell phone and he doesn't have a cell phone, and if he wants something, he has a phone number he could call, and then the car comes comes to get him or whatever.
Like this deluxe Dave concierge service.
Yeah, I don't buy that based on
He
how
calls from a landline. He still has the landline.
So do we, but that's a different story for a different time. I just don't buy the story that Dave doesn't have a smartphone, seeing how fast he responded to the Lukather tribute tour rumors thing, because he got that out same night. And
Right.
and these things are written in his voice when they come back. And I think it was Linda Reisman, still don't know how to say her last name. There was an imposter Dave back in January on Facebook that was responding in the Facebook group, and you just would only know it if you looked at like the one character difference in the like username and like, oh, that's a fake Dave. I said to her, come on, Dave's not on computers. And she said, no, Dave always had top of the line computers and was always ahead of the pack. And when you think about it, Skyscraper recorded on computers to an extent.
Right. And I bet you all that artwork is taking up terabytes worth of storage in the Apple iCloud, right? I mean, he's got some great graphic stuff, and well, for goodness sakes, he did a digital comic, for God's sakes, working hand in hand with the top people who put those sorts of things together. So enough of that. Of course, he's got a cell phone.
Yes. So who knows what the story behind that one was, but I think it'll be interesting to see if any rebuttals come out from these leaks. Like, these leaks are super anti-Sammy. And Sammy says he made amends with Eddie shortly before his passing because George Lopez introduced them or something like that. Or he got the number from Azoff's office or some.
If he doesn't mention, if Sammy doesn't, has he talked about, I haven't seen anything pop up, but has Sammy mentioned anything from the Rolling Stone article? I mean, the two things where he's been uncharacteristically quiet about is the tribute rumors, which did not include his name hardly, and this latest go around of stuff with that RollingStone.com article.
He's been ultra quiet about that, but as a writer, I've gotten 2 or 3 press releases from Team Sammy in the last 3 weeks. One to announce his new restaurant in Florida, one for his Sammy's Beach Bar Cocktail Company, and one for his cookbook or cocktail recipe book. Yeah, he's not slowing down any of that, and he's on tour a lot of the summer with George Thorogood and his band The Circle, which includes Michael Anthony. I've seen some comments from him on things. I'm assuming Sammy has a full-time person whose job is just comment, thanks, brother, on articles. Happy birthday, brother, because he's on fire lately with like responses of like, Bob Weir eats dinner, and then it's like, yo, bro. Like, I don't think Sammy Hagar's on Instagram all day, but I think somebody in Team Hagar is.
Right. I've seen him I've seen him comment on different things, on different posts that people I follow, and it just when I see those little things, that just he saw it and he made a quick comment. Right.
You can have multiple people logged into an Instagram.
Oh yeah, sure you can. Yeah, but some of them read like it could be him. I mean, some of it's just very innocuous. It's some guitar player or something that he did. Do you know what I'm saying? Where it's not even a big piece of news. It's somebody who's just posting some live footage or whatever. I mean, I can't think of any specific examples, but I've seen this on more than one occasion with a couple people I follow. And it always felt like, to me, it was like, oh yeah, he saw this late at night and went, hey, good job, brother, whatever.
Yeah, so he's not commenting on this, but he's very public through social media and promoting his restaurant, cookbook, and cocktail line lately. I guess we should just wait for that one interview where somebody goes, so Sammy, how's your new tour going? Your tour's going great. By the way, what did you think of that Rolling Stone article? I'm waiting because Sammy loves Eddie Trunk. I think he'll do a Trunk interview or who's on his short list of people that he's always on? Does he do the Jeremy White show? Because Michael Anthony's done it twice in the last year and a half, 2 years. Who else is on the Hagar junket list? You're approved because you're not going to say anything positive about David Lee Roth during the interview. Those journalists.
Man, I'm not even sure. I mean, I'm trying to think the last time he did a really big interview as opposed to just here and there quotes and stuff like that, right?
There was one with a website or a YouTube series in Brazil or somewhere in South America. I'm going to say a year and a half ago. And that was around the time when he was pushing the Birthday Bash pay-per-view. It was the first time they ever had to do it isolated as opposed to at Cabo Wabo. It's July. Okay, October is when the Cabo Wabo birthday thing is. He's going
That's right.
to press. Mark my words, we're getting Sammy comments within the next 5 weeks. Calendar that one. You just look at the calendar, because also October is the month of Eddie's passing. So
right.
there is going to be a microphone in his face, because I think you have the quote, he's never met a microphone that he hasn't want to speak into unless it's mine. I got turned down by 3 other people for a Hagar interview. That's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, you're running a good streak there.
0 for 7. The last one I know for a fact got to his desk.
So more speculation, I guess, more wondering what happens next. Is there anything else that this insider hasn't said or will say again, or do you know what I mean? I can't wait to hear and I don't know if there's been a new episode since. I can't wait to hear if they have the folks over at the Van Halen Unchained podcast have anything after that. What do you know what I'm saying? I'm real curious to know what their mailbag sounds like too.
Yeah, the mailbag should be very interesting. The person I'm pretty sure is the source. When I interviewed them a couple of years ago, note I did not use a gender pronoun, just like they did not use it. When I interviewed them a couple of years ago, that person said that they would like to do a second interview with me and ghosted me. So that is one of the reasons that person also said not to use the audio of the conversation with them after we taped the interview with them. So that further added to my suspicion as to why this person is who this person is.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If you're going to do one of those Venn diagrams and you go, again, was around in the early days, knows what's going on now, nice things to say, not a musician, has been in the house plenty to know what's in the basement. My experiences with people around this, and do not quote the gender of this individual. If you put that on a Venn diagram, the answer's hidden in plain sight as to who it is.
Okay.
Without us getting sued for libel or slander, in the 0.001% chance I'm wrong about that one.
Interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm very optimistic, though, that the Van Halen archives are gonna open up. Like, did you hear the rumors that earlier this year Don Landy and Alex were spotted at a mixing studio?
Yes.
And this leak said the box set guy, the guy who worked on curating that early 2000s box set, is not allowed to talk about it anymore.
Heard that too. I think I may have heard that from you.
Yeah, I think stuff is going to have to come out. And if it's not this year, about those like 50-year copyright reversion releases.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So something's going to happen, whether or not we want it or they want it to happen. Something's going to happen. And
something's got to give.
And like Kiss, for example, have you been seeing these unearthed videos that have been popping up from the mid-70s the past couple of weeks?
Well, I saw that. And then today I saw something pop up on, is it called VW Music, I think? It's a website, a blog. First, I saw it on the Kiss podcast, 3 Sides of a Coin Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
This Pro Shot Asylum tour concert popped up from a TV. I guess a TV station was filming it in somewhere down south. And if you're a fan of Kiss non-makeup era years, that's like a big missing hole. There's very few recordings. There was no home video VHS tape like there was from the Animalized tour. Asylum had the biggest stage of that era, the boldest colors, the most ridiculous outfits. I mean, there's been a pro shot forever. I used to have it on VHS of, I think it was the Hot in the Shade tour, and it was from Detroit, I think, Cobo Arena. You know, like I mentioned, you have Animalized, there's Creature stuff. I mean, but that's not coming from Kiss. Kiss has been putting out their own soundboard stuff. But then that other, you're right, the rehearsal footage, and then there was something from, was it not the Love Gun? Was it the Love Gun tour?
I've seen 2 in the last couple of days, but I've only watched them.
Bottom line, there's been some really good stuff coming out.
Well, there was a Japan one, and then there was a Houston one. I think it was Houston. Maybe it was like 76, 77. And these are perfect video shot things. So I see those. And then what keeps coming up on my YouTube are these shows from 83 from South America of Van Halen, where it's like the whole show. And it goes, that makes me think, like, were these broadcast on local television? Just like the US Festival is broadcast on Showtime. What I'm getting at is I think that a lot of stuff was taped, but the right people have been sitting on it for a long time.
I was just going to say, I kid you not, I was thinking of this. I think for Van Halen, I would be shocked if somewhere there was someone, knowing how visual they were and how Dave kept the visual end of things. So, I mean, kept an eye on all the visual end of things. You mean to tell me, like, when they did a full concert run through, a rehearsal, I mean, and we saw what they did for the reunion tour, that was out there. But you mean to tell me from anywhere from Fair Warning or 1984, any of that stuff, they didn't full on tape the last dress rehearsrsal, the last full on run through of the set? Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, it just reminded me that on Cheap Trick's YouTube page, there's about 4 or 5 videos from 1980 of just rehearsal footage with Pete Comita, the guy who was between Tom Peterson and John Brandt. And it's just them running through their set, I think, before, actually, I'm sorry, it was 1981, I think it was. Before, if I remember correctly, I think it may have been before, like, a big Chicago Navy Pier show that later got broadcast on PBS. But it's amazing. But it's just one camera set up in the middle of this rehearsal hall. You don't get any close-ups. It's just somebody set a camera and hit record. And you know, some of the footage, them just walking around and whistling, and Rick's trying on a guitar, and there's no editing. And Cheap Trick put that up there years ago when they were really good at populating their YouTube channel. So many bands tape this stuff. Here's the band that Dave was so attuned to what was going on visually and how they should look, right? I mean, that was his show, and what they should, and how they should move, and what they do on stage, even, I think, to a degree. That, I mean, you know, when they would come dancing up to the front, right? And and Eddie and Sam, oh my God, Eddie and Michael were flanking Dave. You know, that kind of jumping, that, you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
All that stuff was figured out in advance. It didn't just happen naturally in a show, right? I mean, right? Exactly the word I'm looking for. So there's not a videotape somewhere in the basement, right?
Given an exact, precise example. Have you ever seen the documentary, The Lost Weekend one, produced about that MTV contest winner from like 84, I think it was?
Yes, and we talked about it on an episode. I saw it years ago when it first came out, but
you're telling me the camera was not rolling that entire show? They just went, okay, we're only going to turn the camera on for these 5 minutes. Come on. There was a camera crew there. And an earlier interview that we had with Joe Whiting, who opened up a bunch of shows on the Diver Down tour, he said that Van Halen roadies gave him the soundboards to a bunch of the shows. So, you know, is it that the right bidder has to come along to open up the Brinks trucks? Or is it all just mothballed in someone's attic or basement in the case of Dave? I don't know. But
and does everything and does nothing get released while people are still alive?
That, unfortunately,
at least well, I should say, does nothing get surreptitiously leaked while people are still alive?
Stuff will get leaked. stuff will absolutely get leaked, because seeing the number of things that came out after Eddie passed, it was like an 800% increase
Right.
in YouTube content. The lip sync videos from Europe that we never knew existed.
Right.
Yeah. I guess the question is, who's the pissed off person that feels ripped off and then decides to leak it out of revenge?
So one more thing before we get to this week's stellar, awesome interview that we've had in the can. And I joke around, I say this every episode because I love the line, but also it's true what we do here. We might not educate, but we always speculate.
Yes.
And I don't want to give a bad connotation to that word, because it's really us just trying to figure it out, because we are unbelievable fans, right? As are the people who are listening.
Yeah.
Going back to the insider interview, going back to what we've heard and what you've heard, Las Vegas, post Las Vegas, going back to just a couple weeks ago with Dave at LAX airport, how's his health?
Yeah. He clearly is denying publicly that he's in bad health. But like when that reporter at LAX goes, "Can you sing?" And he did that whistle, multi-tone whistle thing none of us can normally do, that somebody was speculating is because he has polyps on his vocal cords. Well, whatever it is, he's not telling you he's sick, aside from that impromptu newspaper interview in Vegas where he said, my medical team advises that every time I go on stage, and the Marlboro Man. And aside from those, he's never, ever said anything. Maybe in his memoir, he said he's in pain every day, but that was 1997. That was 25 years ago. Right.
I think without a lot of news, and prior to the last couple of weeks, especially that LAX video, I think it would be easy to picture this guy hunched over and frail, living a Howard Hughes type life, right? in a mansion with no furniture and an Opel Kadett front end hanging from the entryway, and just painting and stuff. But I just saw it come up again too. I mean, he certainly overalls aside, he certainly looked healthy in the most recent Rogan interview, which was 2021, just last summer.
Yeah.
He
physically healthy, not mentally healthy.
Well,
that was the most drivel, unlistenable Dave interview I think I've ever heard. You can't tell me I'm wrong.
It was hard, man. It was hard to keep track of that stuff. I thought the Marin interviews were hard enough. It was hard. You got to work to glean some nuggets out of some of those, right?
Yeah, when I took notes on that I'm like, I'm doing this for Steve. I'm doing this for Steve. That was painful, but yeah, physically he's fine. He's missing a tooth, but hey, who isn't missing a tooth at this age? And
listen, and we already know, and he's brought it up, and we've talked about before. I mean, he's had probably multiple surgeries, back surgeries, replaced a hip or a knee or something. I mean, basically, if it had anything to do with gravity and landing off a drum riser, he probably heard it and had to get it fixed.
Yeah. And that is, if you reread the Crazy from the Heat book, which I crazily did a couple weeks back, a lot of it is about the pain that he's in and the injuries and all that. And then Noel Monk's book thought that Dave was going to be injured or crippled by a certain year in time. And the more you think about it, the more you kind of hear that when you do all those kicks and those splits, he's flexible as can be, but doesn't mean his form was pretty. He was doing it because he had to. He felt that obligation as the showman. I have to do that stuff. Not because it's what he felt in the moment. That was his choreography.
Right.
Hot for teacher. The kick goes up there. The side goes.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking the other day, actually, and I'm reminded of this because I saw a 77-year-old Rod Stewart Friday night in concert with Cheap Trick opening. And for a 77-year-old guy, Rod's moving pretty good, moving around. He was never a David Lee Roth guy, but he's jogging across the stage. He was never a David Lee Roth as far as kicks and all that stuff, but he was jogging and running across the stage a lot. But it reminded me of that from, if you look at footage from the 2007 reunion to A Different Kind of Truth, to 2015, his activity on stage definitely has slowed down.
Yeah. a friend of mine who's not a Van Halen diehard, he's a Fish diehard, which, you know,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know exactly. Cut him some slack there. I think he saw the 2012 tour of Van Halen, and you know, instead of Roth doing the high kicks, it's just like he's lifting his knee like a little bit above stomach level, and people are like, ooh, you know, as opposed to if you're seeing him on the 2004 tours, 2003, 2004, the Diamond Dave era, it's like he was doing a whelp every 15 seconds. He was doing a high kick every 20 seconds. Like that Finland video in 99, it was, you thought you were looking at a 22-year-old and not a 48-year-old. At a certain point, it slowed down understandably. But
Of course.
I guess the pressure is on him to be Diamond Dave, and that's maybe why he's not out in public as much. He can't do that. You know, nobody at that age can do that.
Well, I think he's not out. I mean, do you mean public appearances?
Yeah. In other words, if your gimmick is like charisma and energy and flexibility,
Oh, right.
martial arts, versus your gimmick is like your Morrissey, all you have to do is kind of be grumpy. Grumpy, and you don't talk to people, and you don't like people, and you're sarcastic. You could do that until you die.
Right. Right. Well, there was certainly there's certainly a gradual evolution as we saw, and that was by design and by physical necessity, right? Here comes the dance floor. We're going to do more of this. I mean, and you get that. You have to understand no one's going to move at 65 the way they did at 25, 35, 45, or even 55, right? I mean, for the most part, most people aren't. And save for maybe Mick Jagger. And it's not like Dave ever let him get himself out of shape. Injuries, he was a high impact front man. You know, and that's and there's dues to be paid for that.
Yeah, so you know, putting on that amount of empathy, I get it and I understand and all that. I just wish he would upfront tell us, I'm in pain, I'm taking it slow, here's what I'm doing. Just basic things like that. And then if he did that, we wouldn't have to dig through his trash, metaphorically, not literally. We wouldn't have to.
Well, he kind of did that in his own way with those announcements around Vegas, my team of doctors and that sort of thing. So he put it out there in somewhat in a typical muddled fashion that there's these reasons. Of course, it's also during a pandemic and people wondered about COVID and everything else. And he's got good reason at that age also to be very wary of it. And I get the precautions you have to take. And I'm still, that whole thing is still a strange mystery to me that nothing ever got rescheduled. Nothing ever, that it was the plug was just like completely pulled. But we discussed that ad nauseum in previous episodes.
It's that he said, I'm retired, and we went, oh, he's retiring. And then he announced like 5 more shows. And then he's put out a couple of singles since then.
And he's recently disavowed, right? And that retirement with the stuff around the tribute
in Mexico, and he's tribute. So, and then the Rocky had this many retirements. Rambo. Did we talk? Like, I'll make this really quick if we did. But did we talk about a quote from his from the Slaughterhouse zine that I found from 1997? He said, like, I threaten retirement 4 times a day and then threaten to unretire 5 times a day. It's something like that. And he was saying that in 97 or 98.
Retirement can take many forms. You retire from touring. You retire from regular touring. You retire from, right? You retire from touring globally. I mean,
yeah, Judas Priest, we're looking at you.
You got to leave the door open a little bit, because I am not going to denigrate anyone who still wants to get out there and get it done if their reasons are pure because they still enjoy doing it. And they got to figure that out. And you've seen the template for older aging rockers, and the audience is pretty damn forgiving.
Agreed. Well, speaking of people who haven't retired, you see what I did there? This week's interview, Bob Marlette.
Yes.
Worked on and co-wrote some of the songs on the DLR Band album because he is and was a John 5 comrade. Ozzy, who's on his list of credits, Rob Zombie. I almost said Bobby Zombie because do you know those comedians Tim and Eric?
Oh, Tim and Eric, great show.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome Job, Great Show is the name of the show. They had this like fake sitcom. It came out at the beginning of the pandemic called Beef House. It was like a Full House parody. And I'm going to say 3 times in their 8 episodes, they kept calling Rob Zombie Bobby Zombie. And me and my wife just can't get enough of Bobby Zombie. And Bob Marlette did work with Rob Zombie, Black Sabbath, Roth, some cool people there.
Yeah, he's definitely got a great resume, and you asked him some great questions. Talks about a bit about the DLR Band record, and there's definitely some mysteries around that record as far as its recording. So, kudos to you.
Well, thank you. Bob was a super, super nice guy to speak with. Very busy. A number of people have been willing to speak with us about the podcast, and then when you actually pin them down, then they kind of ghost you. So we're still trying to figure out whether that was a 10-day album like Dave has said, which I really don't think it was on any level, a 10-day. Still trying to figure out if it was done in Vancouver, like that insider said, which I don't, you and I are, we don't think it was Vancouver, right? It was in LA.
LA, yeah, and damn it, I should have pulled it. And why do I always have Florida? Some of it was recorded in Florida.
Maybe rehearsals happened there because he rehearsed his Vegas band for the 95 run in Florida.
Okay.
And yeah, that's the closest thing I can think of with Florida. I can't picture Dave being a long-term Florida guy. Like, I know Iggy Pop weirdly lives in Miami, or at least he was. I think it was because he can walk around without a shirt all day. That was one of the reasons.
Right.
I just know that Dave is a Florida guy. Like, maybe he wanted to learn how to play Latin percussion and practice his Spanish. And he did that for 6 months, and then he got out of there. Or maybe he's recording Sonrisa Salvaje too.
Well, on that note, you got the reference in. Enjoy the interview with Bob Marlette. Anything else you want to add about it?
Nothing but yeah.
All right. Well, as always, thanks for downloading and listening, folks. And you could reach out to Darren directly. You can hit him up at the Pouchocast on YouTube. You can hit us up directly at the DLRcast at outlook.com or on Twitter. DLRcast is on Twitter.
Yeah, if it's a cease and desist or a libel thing, send it to the podcast one, not me. Steve has to share in some of the responsibility for fake naming this insider. But
if you saw Dave at Ralph's, reach out in Pasadena, reach out to Darren directly.
Oh yeah. Then we'll build up a case on that one. But no. Thanks for listening, Steve. Thanks for putting this together. And yeah, much gratitude here.
My pleasure, my friend.
Aside from tech troubles, good day for you so far?
So far, I can't complain. Life is good. I did all my morning checkup on my beloved Patriots and just see where we're at on the draft, and all is good. So there you go.
It is such a pleasure to speak with you because I've been listening to your music for decades, because not only did you do one of my favorite David Lee Roth albums, but the Halford stuff and the Alice Cooper stuff, etc. But what I read was you started off as a session player that fell into producing. Is that correct, or is that Wikipedia lies?
Well, it's you know what the truth is. It's a little bit of everything, because I actually started out as just a band guy, and then I met my future bandmates Rudy Sarzo and Frankie Benelli from Quiet Riot, and we put a band together in my parents' basement in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then we started like touring the Midwest. And after a couple of years of doing that, you know, the three of us were like, you know what, we got to move to LA. So the three of us moved to LA and started another band in LA with my girlfriend at the time, who was Tony Childs, who used to be signed to, I think she was on A&M or whatever.
Yeah, Tony, Toni. I remember that name. Yeah.
And that was my girlfriend at the time. And we were in a band together for a while. And then when Tony and I broke up, the band broke up. And then, and from there, it kind of turned into, I started getting calls to come play on people's records. And so I was a session player for a few years. And then I joined, I played piano for Al Stewart for a while. And that sort of led me into, it was all essentially just evolution. It was just, you start out way over here. And because when I was a kid, I didn't even know what a producer did,
Right. How many kids these days know what a producer does? They just say beats. And that's it.
So true. So true. So, and from there, it just was like, I was, for a lot of the early years, I was the kind of, I co-produced with the guy who sort of really helped me get my real start in producing, David Kirschenbaum.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I ended up, playing on Tracy Chapman, and then he brought me in co-producing with him, and then that just evolved, and then he just sort of he wanted to do other things, and so then I was like, well, you know what, I'm gonna just start producing, and everything just sort of started going. Actually, that was one of the interesting stories. So when Kirschenbaum, because David and I had been co-producing stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and David got the Tracy Chapman record, and I was supposed to do that with him, but I had just gotten a call to go up north and produce the reunion record of Santana.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had worked with Greg Raleigh from Santana, and he called me up and said, hey, you want to come up north and do this record with Carlos? And I'm like, of course. I mean, I loved Santana when I was a kid. And Greg Raleigh was a big influence back in the day. And
and his work with Journey, also awesome.
Yeah, and then I, through that, I ended up working with a lot of the Journey dudes and all that kind of stuff. So, I've always said that the path was more pretty simple, because it was more of a case of when the phone rang, I answered it and I said yes, so whatever the gig was, just do it and you'll figure it out later. So there you go.
The more people I speak with who've worked with David Lee Roth is the more ties I see to Santana and Journey. Like, for example, do you know Ron Wixo, the drummer?
I think so.
He was Roth's touring drummer in '94, but he was in the Storm before he got that gig.
He had come in later, I think, on the Storm, and
yes.
But I think the second Storm record that I did, he worked on that one too. So
yeah, and how did he get that gig with the Storm? I think it was through Jafra, however you say that band name. And how did he get that? It was through the softball game, which had all those guys that were REO Speedwagon, Journey, adjacent. All the AOR bands played in this Sunday softball game in, I think, Santa Monica or somewhere in LA.
Oh, wow. Yeah, but I was too busy working to play softball, so.
But another distinct thing about you, besides your great production and the great albums that you worked on, is that you co-wrote material on a lot of these albums. So when you were co-writing, is it kind of like I'm in the room making tweaks, or do you do pre-production and the songwriting's part of it?
It was all of the above. I mean, some of the scenarios I would just simply write the song, and then they were like, dude, this demo sounds amazing. Can you come and do our record? And I'm like, sure, okay,
Mm-hmm.
So, because I was that, honestly, I think naturally a lot of the, production and the evolution of everything came from when I was a kid. I was always the guy who, I didn't know just my parts. knew your parts, I knew his parts, I knew everybody's parts. And I, ever since I was a kid, I was just always into writing songs and just sort of figuring out the sort of construction of all things music. And so I just, would always just sort of listen to every single aspect of everything. And because that's honestly, I tell people, because a lot of people think, that I came up through engineering, but it was the opposite. It was engineering just facilitated what was going on in my head. A lot of times I'd be on a record and I go, that just doesn't sound right. It's like, and I'd literally, I'd say like, what does this button here do? It's like, oh, don't touch that button.
Trial by error.
Yeah. And I just sort of slowly figured out everything and did sort of the math on everything. And that was just sort of everything, in my career has pretty much been sort of just the evolution of just, I love music and I love every aspect of everything. And I love people and I love working on these records and it, sort of just kept going and going and going. And like I said, I mean, in a lot of respects, part of the thought process was I never wanted to be trapped or at the mercy of somebody who wasn't getting their job done or wasn't, so I just learned how to do every single thing. So it was sort of a safety net for me of, it's like, hey man, I can do pretty much any kind of record that, I sort of felt like doing at that moment. So that's why, when people look at the discography, they're like, dude, I thought you were a rock guy, and it's like,
Al Stewart, as you said at the beginning of it, and Tracy Chapman, who, yes, it's technically rock because there's booze, but
dude, there were so many. It's like Wilson Phillips, Sheryl Crow, just like endless sort of all sorts of different stuff. And I just, just always loved everything.
So that one album that I keep bringing up, the DLR Band album, I have to ask you about that because the little information that's out there is all from Dave's perspective, a little bit of John Five's perspective. And I don't feel that we've gotten the true story about a few things on that. Like, for example, they say it was recorded in 10 days. I don't see how that was possible because there's like 3 batches of songwriters and multiple guitar players. Like there was the Mike Hartman stuff, there's the Terry Kilgore stuff, and there's the John Five stuff. So was it a mix of sessions, not just 10 days, as they said?
I hate to say this to you, but I don't really know. I don't really know because at the end of the day, the most vivid memories I have of that whole time period was I was mixing I think it was Black Sabbath, or I was doing something with Black Sabbath and Dave used to, it's like I'd be working and because I used to sort of be all the time at Henson Studios, the old A&M studio, became Henson.
Everything in Dave's world revolves around Henson Studios.
Yeah. And so I was working, I think, like I said, I think it was Black Sabbath, but he would be across the street at Crazy Girls, the strip club, all the time, right? And it, when he got bored over there, he'd, buzz over and it's like, hey dude, can I come over and hang out? And it's like, sure, okay. And so I'd be working and he'd come over and he'd just sit there and sort of talk to me while I'm like trying to mix this record and chit chat about stuff. And he was just such a hoot. It was always just, so funny working with him because he was a real character. But I would say, most of my involvement with that, was sort of because I didn't I didn't engineer or produce anything on that. That was all just songwriting, because and that was through that whole thing started because John Five had been like one of my best friends for 30
Right.
plus years. And John was like, hey, Dave called me up and what do you think about doing this? I'm like, sure, okay. So we just started writing tunes and coming up with ideas and stuff. And then that's how, then Dave and I started knowing each other through that. And then he would come visit the studio and stuff. But, it's, that's one of, you got to remember, it's like, I was just thinking about that. One of the hardest things about doing interviews like this is that I've done so many records and
Yes.
so many, it was like trying to remember, because it's always, people are always like, tell me, what snare did you use on? Like, dude, I can't even remember yesterday's snare, it's like, and people are grilling me for inside info on stuff. And I'm like, man,
Right.
And it's funny because the way I look at it is I'm very immersive. Like when I'm on that project, that is the most, center of my universe and the most important thing in the universe. But the second I'm done,
Next.
I'm on to the next record. And it's like everything about that, it's that when I'm grilled for stories on Tracy Chapman, right? I'm like, I did 2 records with her, but on that first record, we had no idea, 0 idea that was going to do what it did,
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of had to go back and try to remember, shit that happened on that record because people, what's the language?
Be yourself. That's
okay.
the language.
Right. So people were always grilling me. It's like, oh man, tell me what this was like. I just sort of go back and sort of remember like sort of anecdotal and things about making that record because it was like I said, it was just
right.
It was another record in the slot. And it was actually, I didn't even know that it was becoming so successful. It was actually my buddy Randy Jackson who called me up, Marlette, dude, that thing's huge. And I'm like, what thing? And he's like, oh dude, Tracy Chapman. I'm like, oh no way. Because and I always tell people, anybody that says that they knew that was going to be huge are lying. Because no one knew. Everybody thought it was a great record,
right?
But that wasn't, there's a big difference between that's a great record and that's going to be huge,
Right.
And I've always said that about record making. It's like, in that moment, you may think it's the best thing you've ever done, but people let you know, man. People let you know whether it's working or not, so.
But going back to that DLR Band album, you co-wrote more songs than anybody on that album because you were on the tracks that John co-wrote. You were on tracks that I'm looking at the credits here. I think there's a Terry Kilgore track that you have a co-write on. But bottom line is like, do you remember Slam Dunk, for example? That song's kind of like Hot for Teacher Light. Do you?
Okay. That actually, it's funny you say that because that's probably the only song on that whole record that I actually remember anything about. and it's only because I remember John and I sort of sitting there and I looked at him and I said, you know what? I love that song, Hot for Teacher. I thought, what a cool song that is, that, that kind of shuffly thing. And I'm like, we should do a song like that, And so and then we just, John and I just sort of, oh, here, let's try this, let's try that. And we just sort of, it just sort of was born out of that, because it was like, I mean, that happens so many times that you're just sitting around, you go, God, I love this, or it could be, I mean, when you're writing for a record, it's more than anything, it's just sitting around and chit-chatting about about things and about concepts of what you want to do. And then all of a sudden, because I've always said that songwriting is kind of like picking a little neutron or atom out of space, and just sort of like, oh, let's try that, throw it in, and it's like, nah, it's not killing me. You throw it back in the ether, and then you pick another idea and you go, ooh, that's cool, And so that was one of those that we just born out of conversations, we sort of said, okay, let's try this idea. So but here's the thing that's so funny, because most people that interviewers like yourself, they'll have a certain snapshot in time of something that affected them. And then because I did an interview a while back, and a guy was just obsessed with the Halford record. Right. And so that, like I said, that's the hard part. It's like it's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that record. So, and when you get into the weeds about sort of just the minutia of it, it's like, nah, I don't remember.
But overall, you found Dave friendly, sociable, easy to work with?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, but he had a lot in common with a lot of artists of that time period, with a certain measure of success. There's like, because it honestly wasn't that much different than working with guys like Ozzy and people like that. I mean, they're people who, their brains are sort of always like bing, 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 exploding with ideas, and more times than not, a good portion of my job is saying, okay, I see the synopsis sort of like ding, 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 going crazy, but whoa, let's sort of pull it back. Yeah, let's figure out how to turn all these gazillion ideas into something that is gonna work and for the audience. So that's kind of my takeaway from Dave, was that what a cool, interesting dude, and smart as a whip, and he's like very clever and all that kind of stuff. But it's like a lot of times there's when you got a brain sort of firing all over the place, you kind of got to figure out how to turn it into something.
Right.
So, and actually that was one of my, it's the same sort of scenario, but in the early days, I was in a band with the guys from I was like sort of in Frank Zappa's band. But the way it worked was because I never learned how to read music. So everything to me was just sort of, just the process of like, I would hear it and I would immediately be able to, because I started really as a keyboard player, was my, because everybody thinks I'm a guitar player, or actually a lot of people think I'm a bass player too, because, the amount of times that I've played bass on record, but it was only because maybe the bass player was busy and couldn't be there to do the record, and everybody's like, here, Bob, you play bass, it's like, okay, sure. So but everybody, a lot of people didn't realize that keyboard was actually my main instrument, right? But with the Zappa dudes, they're when they weren't touring, all of the guys got together and then they asked me to come in. And my job literally in that band, although I was playing keyboards, I was also mainly just kind of the ringmaster. It's like, okay, all of you guys are ridiculous sick players, but it's like no one is getting what you're doing, so so that was kind of my job. It's like, okay, that's really cool that you can do that, but here, Vinny, instead of going it's like, why don't we do it's like, so that happens more times than not. Is just that sort of, my job is essentially the ringmaster, if you will.
My last question related to all that, and it's okay if you don't remember, but the bass tracks on the DLR Band album, on most of the songs, if not all of them, were also done by Mike Hartman, and that was under the alias Bourbon Bob. I was wondering if there was a connection between Bourbon Bob and the fact that you're Bob.
No. Actually, Matt, I don't think I ever actually met him, and when I say, because you know, part of the thing I think I was doing Black Sabbath at the time.
Mhm.
So I couldn't really you know, because trust me, Black Sabbath was a 24/7 universe, right?
Darren has you covered.
Yeah. So you know, so it was more of a case of, like I said, it's, you know, John and I, and, you know, whatever songwriting, you know, incarnations that happened on that. That was more of, you know, I couldn't physically do, you know, work on anything in that record. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if I heard much of that record, you know, it's like, and you know, but understand something, I want to be very clear
That's
about
awesome.
this. That doesn't mean that I didn't love it and didn't care about it.
Right.
It just meant that my universe was so intense that a lot of times it's, you know, even a lot of records that, you know, a lot of times I'm in that moment,
Mhm.
and then next moment, you know, and then just sort of moving on.
If you're a professional golfer, you're not golfing in your downtime, most likely. I get what you're saying. You did it once. You don't
Mhm.
quite need to relive it unless you have to do research or something like that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times, you know, I mean, part of the process is, you know, you learn by mistakes, you know, and especially in the early days, you know, when I would do a record and then I'd hear it on the radio and I go, oh God, I hate that. I hate that I didn't do that or that. And that's part of the learning curve of saying, okay, next record, I am not going to do that, you know,
Right.
and just, you know, it's all, you know, God, I've been making records 50 years now. 50 years. I
You
made
don't
my
look
first.
it, but that's
Thank you.
that's an
You're a
incredible
gentleman. I'm 66 years old. You're a gentleman and a scholar for saying that. But I made my first record in 1972. Yeah. And it's like, I'm older than dirt, you know.
No
I tell you
wonder.
though, I was going to say though, that the thing that I love the most is that after doing this for 50 years, I I I love the fact that I'm still making records that kids want to listen to.
Yeah.
You know, considering some of those kids could be my grandchildren, you know. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Well, before I let you go, anything you want to plug or places that people should be looking for the latest and the greatest from you at?
You know, and I'm working all the time and I'm doing new records all the time and I love what I do. There, you know, it's like every day there's something new and it, you know, I can't even keep track still after all these years
Yeah.
but I think it's kind of cool though, because it's one of those things when, you know, when listeners and people, they, you know, all of a sudden they look at it, oh my God, Bob Marlette did that record. You know, it's like, and I love that thing where, you know, guys like yourself, when you like see something and like, oh my God, he just did that record. I had no
Yeah,
idea.
I read the
You know?
liner notes.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, because that's a lost art form.
Yeah.
You know, because kids nowadays, man, the way that kids assimilate music is so different, you know,
Sure.
because in the old days, man, you'd buy that product, you own that product, and you would sit there and you would read. Well, that's a lost art form because now it's one click, you listen, you go, oh, okay, I like that, or and click, next click, you know.
Right.
And so, and there's very little, you have to sort of be a fan in some respects to do a deep dive, because
Mhm.
a lot of, you know, a lot of kids are, you know, because part of it is their mindset is so, you know, it's like my son, you know, in any given moment, okay, he's on his computer, but the TV's going and he's also listening and clicking on Spotify,
Yeah.
and he's playing a video game on this thing. And, you know, it's like, it's all this sort
Multitasking.
of, yeah, there's this bing, bang, boom, you know, so. But I will give my son a plug because he's
Please.
and my wife, because they're actually my son and wife are teaming up producing a new record now. So they're actually on 2 records. It's like, so I'm definitely passing the torch on, because turns out my son's pretty brilliant. You know, he's quite the I'm very lucky that the apple did not fall far from the tree. So
What's the name of the son and or wife's project?
well, Chris Marlette is my son, actually, and some fans may know because he played drums on the Red Sun Rising record. He
Right.
did Filter and a bunch of stuff. So but the thing that like is a little tough for me is because he's now back in school getting his degree for gaming design, because he wrote a script for a video game, and it's like he's like, you know what, I want to program this myself, so he's actually back doing that. My wife is the singer and guitar player for No Small Children, and she's in another band where she's the drummer in the Drama Dolls. And she did, actually my wife did for the new Ghostbusters movie, or not the newest
All Rudd one, or the Leslie Jones?
all female one, the
Yes.
all female one. She did the Ghostbusters in title credit for that. That's her and her band. And she did that Anna Kendrick's Blake Lively Simple Favor, I think it's called. She did the end title credit for that. So she's totally badass. My son, I'm so blessed. I'm a lucky man. Life is pretty darn good. It's hard to complain,
So now there's 3 Marlettes that we have to follow the latest and greatest from. Oh boy,
exactly. I know that's the deep dive, but it's just so funny because it's just I mean, for my son, you got to remember he grew up with all of these rock stars like hanging out at the house, or him being at the studio. And it's like, actually yesterday we were hanging out with some other people, and he reminded me the story of him. Rob Halford was here at the studio at the house, and he was sitting on the couch, and my son, because Rob would sit there, and read the paper. He had his glasses on, his, shaved head with the tattoos, right? And my son used to take his little Matchbox cars and go over Rob Halford's head, right? And Rob would just sit here like it was nothing. And I would look back and I'm like, Chris, come on. And it's like, and it was just the cutest, funniest thing ever. And then Billy Idol took Chris on a ride on his Harley, and that scared the shit out of me. But it was like, it was just, just amazing, amazing childhood. And to him though, it's like, whatever. It's like, it's like, hey man, it's all good. So pretty crazy,
Bob,
crazy life,
And thank you enough for all the information and the stories and all that you shared. It's really great to see somebody having such a long career based on talent and being a good hang, and not just a good hang.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I've like I said, I've lived a charmed life, and I'm so great, because that's the other thing for me. I never lose sight of the gratitude for things that have happened in my life. Yes, I've worked very hard, but it's also, never losing sight of the smile in doing it. Because that's a big thing, man. It's like, I think that's one of the key reasons why I'm still doing it, is that because honestly, I haven't had to make a record in years, but I just love it. It still brings me pleasure.
And you bring us pleasure through that music. So thank you for your time, and just have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Anytime, I'm around.